G'day. Welcome back to another episode of Three Mates. I guess sometimes consistent, sometimes not so consistent format of the podcast in which I get to sit down with two of my best mates and have what we believe to be relevant and hopefully helpful conversations. I'm here with, to my right, as you're seeing it or maybe hearing it, Joey Plum and Ty Groove.
Pleasure to be here.
And today feels like a really important episode. It's a very sensitive issue at hand. We're here to speak about the physical violence, the sexual abuse and emotional abuse of women, which is a prevalent topic, of course, globally, but more specifically for all of us in Australia right now. Mm-hmm. And we know that we've had a problem with domestic violence in Australia for a long time. And of course, as awareness increases around issues like this and the voice of the media and the voices of minorities online come to light, we start to understand more about it. And sometimes in that awareness, it can feel like a problem's getting worse. That's something we're here to discuss today. Are things improving? Are they getting worse? We're here as three young men between the ages of early 30s and late 20s to discuss the questions that we have that we'd like more clarity around. We're definitely aware of the fact that we're not going to get this perfect. We're trying to understand. We're trying to learn, which I think is an important point for any man to consider in this, is how can we learn and understand and have empathy for the women that we're speaking to and hearing from, the women who feel like they've been a part of these really sad statistics that represent abuse and, assault on women in 2024. But I guess the structure of today's podcast is firstly to ask and, share thoughts on a bunch of questions, to present solutions that we think men can be a part of to improve environments for women and create safe environments for the women that we love and just women in Australia in general, but also to speak about some of the solutions that aren't helpful. Some of the stuff that, I shouldn't say solutions, some of the things that are being disguised as solutions but aren't helpful to us as a society today. So, lads, I guess the question I'll open up with...
Well, I might even just jump in quickly, Brad. I think... given the sensitivity of this topic, and I think it is our job to not shy away from having conversations that are uncomfortable or sensitive, and we've done it in the past. And I'm not sure about you guys, but there's almost similar to the masculinity episode. We shot that episode and had that conversation at the height of the conversation around toxic masculinity, and there was this almost nervousness or cautiousness to have this conversation because we don't want to offend anyone. We're doing our best to offer our perspectives from a well-intended, good-hearted place to help collaborate with everyone in the audience and otherwise to diminish or minimize a problem at hand. So we've spent some time even before episode, outside of the homework that we've done, just making sure that we can kind of get to a place where we can do our best job to not, misquote, misstep, or maybe make comments that are not helpful. So please bear with us. I think it's a super important conversation for us to be having, whether it's comfortable or otherwise. And if this is a difficult conversation for anyone to hear, given the three men that sit on this couch and our male perspective, absolutely you don't have to go ahead with the podcast. But we're just going to do our best to offer perspectives and flesh out the problems and potential solutions that we can offer, and where we can be accountable for the issue at hand. So a little disclaimer around potentially sensitive topic for a lot of people, and I just want that to be known that we're going to do our best here. So, yeah.
Of course. And I think before I even open up the question, you did allude to the fact that we spent some time prior to the episode discussing this, and it's been a topic of conversation that's, come to the surface over the course of our chats and catch-ups over the last couple months, where there have been some statistics and news stories that have encouraged reflection and conversation. But on Friday morning in particular, we went for a walk and a coffee sit down to discuss how we wanted to address today's episode. And I think for me, leaving the coffee, I recognise that I'm so privileged to exist in a group of really good men And as a real optimist, as someone who, sees the world through very positive eyes, I do believe there is so much good in the world and more good than bad that exists. And I want to highlight that good. I want to make people feel hopeful about what the future looks like and what today and tomorrow can look like.
Absolutely.
But also I think our sole hope off the back of this episode is to be ultimately helpful, but to continue to be good men and just, add to the world as opposed to take from it.
So. There's an element of confusion, and we can speak from our perspective as men trying to help the issue and to better ourselves, to better society, that this is a confusing one. And if anything, this conversation can maybe help highlight some of that confusion for other good men in this situation that might not even have a means to have a convo. So what do you do with that confusion as a young man that's trying to be helpful if you don't have a platform to speak about it? Maybe we can be that for you, for the other young men listening, to share in the confusion, to maybe offer some clarity to alleviate some of that confusion. And yeah, at the very least, I also agree with the sentiment, Brad, that there is more good than bad in the world, and that the future can and will be more positive for those that are suffering now. And I think that's an important message to maintain.
It's a good perspective. But yeah, well, when this stuff broke on social media or started coming out, my first initial thought or response to it was like, I don't know, I've almost felt like defensive against males, or not to say that this stuff that happens is okay, but more so from the perspective that, like, I consider myself a good guy. I surround myself with good guys. Like, I didn't even know that this was a problem. Like, I feel like I'm somewhat so far removed from this that I don't see it as a problem. And then to educate myself, or to get up to speed, I suppose, on this stuff, I listened to a few podcasts, talked to a few women, and then, yeah, obviously there's a problem going on. I don't have the solutions. I'm not a statistic master in this. I suppose from my perspective, I'm probably more removed from this situation than a lot of other people, but I'm more than happy to talk about it and give my perspective, and hopefully I can help someone. And
I commend you for that, Foons, because, like, again, the beauty of us sitting here on this lounge is we have three very different perspectives. For some context, my mum is one of 11. Of those 11 kids, my aunties and uncles, there's only 2 men. And I was brought up by that single mother. So ultimately, I was brought up by women. Foonies on the opposite spectrum.
Opposite spectrum. Like, I've only got uncles by blood. Out of all my cousins, 70% of them are guys.
Yeah.
So I'm almost, I've pretty much been raised around men. All my friends are guys, like almost the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah. Like, legit, I was raised by sisters, mothers and aunties. You were the opposite, Foons. And so for you to do the due diligence before this conversation to go, hey, let me actually schedule some chats with some women in my life, because I am pretty removed from this conversation.
I think, well, from my perspective, why would I not want to live in an environment where women feel safe, happy, cherished, like, as opposed to fearful? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
It's interesting for me. I grew up with a healthy mix of both men and women in my life. That, I guess, almost the stereotypical Aussie family, mum and dad, 2 kids, eldest boy, youngest, young one's a girl, and a healthy mix of female and male cousins, aunties and uncles who are around. So I was always around a healthy mix of, and also very healthy environments where we all felt very safe in the presence of my dad. My dad is a protector by nature, but my dad was a police officer, and so was my pop. And I always heard the extreme stories of DV that existed in the lower socioeconomic areas within Australia, with a father who was a police officer. We do have relatively high crime rates in Wollongong. My dad spent all of his decade in the force in Wollongong. And so you would hear those stories almost after every shift as a man who was, growing up and able to hear those stories and understand and digest them. And you can almost be confused when you exist in really healthy and happy households that these cases of DV and abuse or violence towards or against women exist only in these environments in which criminal activity often occurs. And it's, we're really understanding and learning now that that's not the case. And one of the things that I know come to the surface of our conversation on Friday morning, and I think you presented at Foons, was this idea of, it seems there's a confusion between men and women in how they define sexual abuse or sexual assault, and almost as what we could identify as this grey area, where there's a grey area that particularly young men don't realise is quite offensive and quite scary and quite uncomfortable for women when they partake in that kind of behaviour. So I guess my first question to you guys is, what do we think exists in that grey area? And I know you've got an incredible diagram, a pyramid that kind of details sexual abuse and where this starts and where it ends, from kind of, I guess, the entry-level offences that often can be just pushed to the side and gone, oh, that's just guys being guys, through to the stuff that's obviously as serious as rape.
Absolutely.
Well, this was
Let's start there.
Photo that was circulating on social media, not this exact one, but basically, I don't know if you haven't seen it, it's a pyramid, and then at the bottom it's got things such as like locker room banter, bragging, slut shaming, boys will be boys, and then obviously all the way up to extreme rape and DV. But if this is the definition of sexual violence, like this stuff down the bottom, well, definitely myself as a 15-year-old boy, that kind of stuff was water off a duck's back almost. Like, it didn't affect me, but if you had to put yourself in a female's shoes or a female's perspective, I think this is like the 1% of stuff that goes on, that goes not undetected, but just it's easier to let it slide than it is to call it out. Yeah, I suppose as a culture as a whole.
Let me ask you this, Foons, on that comment there. And we all know this because I think any young man or any man right now who thinks back to their teenage years is lying if they say they haven't sat in an environment where this conversation has been had and they've ultimately let it slide. Because as a young guy, my thought is that your fear is being outcast from the group. I think any young person thrives in connection, and any young person who doesn't have connection wants connection. And so this desire to be a part of a group, to be in an in-group who respect you and think that you're cool and important and valuable to that group, is where we sometimes in those conversations can feel that lump in the throat or that sick feeling in the stomach that what was just said there makes me uncomfortable and I'm not really okay with it. Or maybe you don't even recognise that at the time. It's unconscious.
Put myself in my own shoes at 15. Like, this kind of stuff didn't make me feel uncomfortable at all. It was kind of like, it was the norm.
And just to clarify, when we're saying this type of stuff, it's that quote unquote locker room chat. Boys will be boys. Making comments about girls' looks or the very common example of sharing photos of, on Snapchat, someone sent you a picture and you show the boys or it's photos are being passed around, and things like this were, and not proud to say, these were a part of all of our teenagers' experience as young men. And it wasn't really, culturally it was completely fine because it's what the boys do. The boys are doing it. And until you, I guess, to what you're saying, Brad, I've been in situations like that having sisters and growing up around women was very aware that it was like, this is not right. I'm not partaking in this. I'm turning away, but I'm not necessarily shutting it down. I'm not outcasting myself to say, hey guys, stop, this is wrong. Let's put our phones away and let's not speak about and treat girls this way. No, because it's, again, growing through the social dynamics of as a teenage boy. When this is the dominant culture that is existing, then that behavior is accepted and it's normalized. Just clarifying, when we're talking about this behavior, it's these potentially grey area, lower tier behaviors and actions that might not seem as significant as the crisis at hand being, or the crisis that is being exposed right now, which is the rape, the sexual assault, the domestic violence against women. These are a part of what I think, and we'll get to it, these are a part of what I think is the problem, being a culture that appropriates, normalizes, accepts, turns a blind eye to certain micro behaviors, which potentially allow macro, more extreme behaviors to exist.
Yeah, because even as a 30-year-old man now, I listened to a podcast where they spoke about this, and before I listened to the podcast, I wouldn't have considered like locker room chat, boys will be boys culture to be sexual assault. But like I'm a 30-year-old man, I'm not in that environment anymore. But as I said, like as a 15-year-old boy, this was normal. I definitely did this stuff. But as I've grown up as a man, you kind of almost grow out of these things. Well, I definitely did anyway. I don't know if I can speak for everyone. But definitely the awareness that it's brought to me that, yeah, I didn't even consider this stuff to be on the sexual assault pyramid.
Can I take a look at that pyramid there?
Yeah, I'd love a look at that too.
Because I think... Yeah, sorry, Brad.
Whilst you referred to that, I think the reason that this is such a relevant point of note for us here today is, for an example of someone who's doing incredible work around this, you can look to a woman by the name of Chanel Contos, who wrote a book called Teachers Consent, is a huge part of the movement behind schools providing education on consent as part of their curriculum from here on out for, I think, students up to the age of year 10. And she's a huge part of a movement online, which is starting to call out and recognise this behaviour. And I heard her on a podcast, I know you've listened to it too, Foons, with the Imperfects boys, where Chanel spoke about the fact that the main perpetrators of sexual violence in Australia and sexual abuse are men between the age of 15 and 19. And that's a scary statistic because we're talking about boys. We're talking about boys who are in a school environment who are still growing up and understanding what it means to be a man. And at that age, they're so impressionable. And she spoke about how important her job is to inform women on what they should see as red flags and what they should call out. And I think as young men, especially at our ages, we have such a role to play, and this is for any young man listening, we have such a role to play in the way that we serve as role models for these younger men who are so impressionable. And I want to point out, you just mentioned something there, Joey, is like someone who grew up with sisters, and I grew up with a sister myself who's a little bit younger than me, and you feel this sense of desire to protect those women. If that was your sister in the conversation, you would get so protective. And I know that all my mates knew you don't make a joke about sissy.
Yeah, likewise, yeah.
And it was like that was very much a part of what was understood at school. And I had very good mates, right? However, I look to that period of time, and I look to a guy who I think is doing incredible work for these young men, a guy by the name of Tommy Herschel, who I've been privileged to connect with over the course of the last week, and we've been having some conversations over the phone and over message. And Tommy's going into schools and doing this facilitation work. And a big part of Tommy's focus is encouraging the vulnerability for people to feel comfortable opening up about where they've gone wrong as men, or where they've been abused, or where they've been bullied, or where they've been the victim of this kind of behaviour. And then he's encouraging accountability so that people understand the wrongdoing and can move forward positively from that. And he shared this beautiful example. I'll probably butcher this story a little bit, but I think it'll give you the context of what I'm talking about here, about this young man who stood up in one of his workshops at a school in front of a group of his mates and said, a bunch of my mates, a bunch of the men in this class make sexually explicit jokes about my older sister. And there was a few laughs in the room. And he said, nah, this is enough, boys. My sister, to not any of your knowledge, was sexually abused last year, and this is really hurtful and harmful for her, and it bloody hurts me too, because I love her and I want to look after her. And the more that you guys joke about it, the more disrespected she feels and the more disrespected I feel in the process. It's got to stop. Enough's enough. And then a group of the lads in this class stand up and take ownership for the fact that they know they've done wrong. They appreciate him sharing because they've been able to recognise it now. And hey, we're going to be better. Let's be better. We didn't know your sister experienced this. And I think it's such a healthy, such a healthy way to tackle this is if we can encourage people to be vulnerable and open up and take ownership and be accountable for the actions and the times that we get it wrong. You know,
Yeah.
this is so important. We need to support people in being open about where they're getting it wrong at this level, because at this level, things can change.
And I think there's two things in that for me, Brad. Is one, the first step is the confrontation of the wrongful behavior, or the even the courage to let a group of people know that, hey, I'm uncomfortable by
Blowing the
this.
whistle.
Blowing the whistle, like to say, hey, like this is not okay, and you're the minority. It's a courageous act to stand in front of, you know, peers, workplace, family, whoever it may be, and say enough's enough. This is wrong, and putting yourself in that position. It's not easy to do, but what the story you've just presented, Brad, is like it started with that confrontation of the wrongful behavior, and then the second piece to that is the acknowledgement of that wrongdoing by people who may have been unaware that what they were doing was wrong. And I think that's why this pyramid is so powerful, Foons, because it can educate people who are potentially unaware of the effects of their behaviors that, and I quote off this pyramid, things such as catcalling, following, bragging about sexual experiences, for example, body shaming, objectification, rape jokes, non-consensual exposure, groping, non-consensual touch, stalking.
Clearly going up the pyramid.
I'm
now.
going up the pyramid, and it gets more and more unclear what's wrong as we go up the period. You know, we've got sexual abuse, gang rape, homicide, murder. We know that's wrong, but the grey area where people go, oh shit, I didn't actually realize that was wrong, because it's just been like laughed at or celebrated in the past, you know, bragging, oh, I got with this girl, and the boy's like, nice one, not realizing that that's harmful. And if I give a moment of vulnerability here and offer an experience that where I was in a position where I wasn't aware of my actions until it was called out, and this is a pivotal moment for me. I think I would have been maybe 18 years old, at a nightclub partying. You're dancing with a girl, you're starting to create a little connection with a girl, and it sounds silly, and I can laugh about it now only because of how naive I was. But the song that was popular at the moment was Big Sean, and the song was called Ass, and it literally goes ass, 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 ass. And so we're all on the dance floor, guys and girls mingling. I've been dancing with this girl. Big Sean Ass comes on. And then I'm thinking, of course, I'm just going to slap this girl on the ass, and that's a part of the song, and it's, you know, it's fine, and it's just, we're dancing and we're connecting. I smacked her on the bottom. The second I did that, she seized up, turned to me with a disgusted look on her face, and retreated to her group of friends. And I overheard her saying, that guy just slapped me on the ass. And I was so embarrassed, and I was so like, oh shit. And I retreated to my group of mates, and I was just like, fuck, I'm being exposed here. The fact that she confronted me, I guess indirectly, but she didn't allow it to happen. In her discomfort, she was like, no, fuck, go away, and went to her friends. And the feeling that I felt was so crucial and pivotal for me as an 18-year-old guy, because I knew in that moment, that's wrong. You can't do that. Whether you're vibing with the girl or not, non-consensual touch, that's a part of this pyramid, which I've just read out. It's like, don't touch somebody if they don't want to be touched. So young boys, if you're out at the nightclub, don't be pinching girls on the bum, or don't be hugging them if they don't want to hug, and don't be, God forbid, don't be kissing them if they don't want to be kissed. And it goes up. Don't be having sex with people who don't want to have sex. And this idea of non-consensual touch was a lesson that I received at that stage, and I received that loud and clear. And then it's reaffirmed by the fact that, yeah, of course that's wrong. I would hate for someone to do that to my sisters. So I was lucky enough for it to have I guess it was reaffirmed by myself after this girl was felt like she was violated and made it clear. Then I had the moment of like, yeah, you idiot, Joe. Of course you don't just slap a girl on the ass. Like, that's not okay. But some people, don't have the experience where the person that they've made uncomfortable lets them know, that confrontation of the bad behavior is so important, but it's also so difficult. So I'm not trying to pass the buck and say, well, if you're a victim, then you have to stand up against it. I know that there's so much that makes that a difficult and sometimes impossible thing to do, especially in the face of physical violence. But in my circumstance, I was confronted by the behavior, and then I had enough fucking sense in my brain to go, yeah, Joe, you deep down knew that was wrong. How would you feel if someone did that to your sisters at a nightclub? You'd feel shit. Lesson learned, we don't do that. That's a lesson that I think some people maybe don't learn.
I reckon there'd be so many boys between the age of what Brad said before, is it 15 to 19, where most of these cases happen. Like so many guys in that age bracket would look at the bottom of this pyramid where it's like smacking a girl in the ass at the nightclub, like footy culture, locker room culture, slut shame, all that kind of stuff, and wouldn't necessarily consider that sexual assault. It's more of kind of a cultural thing. But I think definitely for me, it brought awareness for me as a 30-year-old boy. I've grown out of that stuff naturally, but at 18, that stuff was all like, I thought that was fine.
Yeah. And yeah, this is the education.
So like you're definitely not alone there in your way of acting as an 18-year-old. It's inappropriate, but like it's so much of this stuff would happen. Yeah. And shout out to that girl for calling it out, because it's probably easier for her to play along because she doesn't want to be confrontational.
Yeah. Or allow it to happen to a degree and then kind of just usher herself away, and then God forbid she's like in the toilet crying once she finally like comfortably got away from me without me being like, you know, the fact that I made someone uncomfortable like that makes me feel sick, and it makes me feel like shit. If she didn't call it out, you wouldn't even know that was a problem. And that's why I shout it, and then I agree. Shout out to that girl for going, don't fucking touch me. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry. You know, I'm not that guy. I thought it was okay. Now I know it's not okay. Like, thank you to that girl for giving me that lesson. It's interesting, right, that I'm thinking about this right now, and one of the things that I think Chanel spoke about really beautifully, and I think I'm probably 2 degrees going to quote her quite a bit here, because I think she's doing a lot from a female's perspective to share insight. I think it's really valuable for us to understand. And one of the things she spoke about in defining consent is the natural progression of intimacy usually happens step by step. And if you're checking in with each other step by step, and not so much in the verbal, hey, are you okay, are you comfortable, but in the being there physically present with each other and recognizing the comfort, and that both sides are moving towards this interaction together, and there's a natural step-by-step progression, then naturally there is a positive feeling there in the room. It's often when things like alcohol... Mutual. Yeah. It's often when things like alcohol come into play, and, you know, or substances of any kind in which young people are experiencing, the natural steps of intimacy, or almost some of those middle steps, are removed, and you go from 0 to 100 in incredibly quick space of time. And, you know, I think it's interesting to note for a lot of people how you should probably think about the natural progression of intimacy in that phase of, you know, sexually connecting with someone, because naturally when it moves slower, there's more opportunity for people to announce they're uncomfortable with the situation as it's unfolding. And it's, you know, I can't speak to, it's actually hard for me to explain this because with liver disease, I never drank alcohol. Sober. So I was always a sober guy, really aware of my surroundings, but I was also not a stud as a young guy. Like, if you ask my mum, she tells you I'm the most handsome bloke on the planet at all ages. It's a paid actor. Yeah, it's a paid actor, exactly. It's almost bribery. But I was like, from the age of 13 through to like 18 or 19, like struggled with bad acne, was confident when it come to like getting up in front of a group of people and trying to be funny or being smart or being athletic. But in terms of like any sort of romantic connection with the opposite sex, I was fucking terrified at all stages of my teenagehood. So I didn't really get myself into a lot of these situations where potentially wrong behavior could occur. However, I think what's interesting to note is, as a young guy who
is incredibly nervous about those interactions because you have a lack of self-worth for how you're going to show up in romantic situations and romantic connections, is you're almost scared to ask questions about whether they feel comfortable because you're so nervous and you feel so uncomfortable yourself. You're almost stumbling through this. And I think it's
do you feel comfortable? Because I don't. I'm nervous as hell.
yeah, it's, and that's the thing. It's like, but
Something
you don't want
sexy
to
about that.
Yeah, but it's almost you don't think that that's sexy as a young guy. As a young guy, you're like, I don't want to tell them I'm uncomfortable because they'll think that's unattractive.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like now as a grown man who has a beautiful relationship, I know that in all of the early stages of my relationship, being able to like freely communicate and be very vulnerable with that, as a guy who's had the absolute privilege that not a lot of people are afforded through having a podcast and speaking on stage and getting very comfortable with vulnerability in all of its different forms, in all of its different environments, in the early stages of what's now a beautiful relationship for me. 18 months today, by the way, lads.
18 going on 10 years.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
I can look back on that vulnerability in the early stages of my relationship and go, man, I felt so comfortable in that, and that was so beautiful because we were able to connect so deeply. But as a young man,
it deepens the intimacy. It doesn't kill
correct.
it. It deepens the
but
intimacy.
as a young man, you're so fearful of that. And so as a young guy, I wish I had men who were like that little bit older than me saying, women are attracted to vulnerability and women celebrate the vulnerability and the openness in connection. It doesn't make you less masculine. You can still show up as a masculine man, but be honest and be comfortable in that honesty. And I think a lot of the time they're as scared as you are.
And I think the attraction derives from it. And to offer this, I guess, advice to young men, like Brad said, women are attracted to that honesty, that openness, that vulnerability, because it creates safety.
I think just to add to that, women are attracted to that, pending that you still lead.
You're leading by saying, hey, leader of this situation, are you nervous? I'm so nervous right now. That level of openness creates safety. And that safety allows someone's comfort levels to get to a place where they can be mutually, where you can both be mutually open to the situation progressing. Very hard to do when you're 10 vodka sodas deep and like blaring music, ass. There's no it's all fucked up then. Like that's not the place to have a beautiful, open, safe connection. And I mean, that's another conversation around the environments that we place ourselves in. But yeah, nice little sidebar, Brad. I agree. Foods, you got something?
I was just adding to that, like it's still I think vulnerability in this day and age, women are very receptive to it, but as a man, you still have to lead. That's where I think like traditional men will say like vulnerability is a weakness, but as long as you're still leading as a man, I think it's a strength.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You were going to step into something else there, Joey?
Well, I was just going to structurally move the conversation along. Like we've spoken about the definition and education around what is harmful behaviour that leads its way into the most extreme cases.
I think
did we want to maybe
summarise it quickly from my perspective anyway? I think the grey area around the bottom of the pyramid, that being the footy room culture, slut shaming, all that kind of stuff, I think men and women just see it from a different perspective. And I think it's our role as males to be more receptive to how vulnerable females are around this.
Absolutely. I love that.
To quote her again, just to summarise that and like add a brilliant final point on this topic, Chanel Contos had I think, bang on line that sexual assault occurs most commonly where a man's entitlement outweighs his empathy for the woman he's connecting with.
Yep.
And I think that's a beautiful way of looking at it. As men, if you can flip it and start with empathy and remember that there's no entitlement and that it's a consensual connection. If you've got that empathy, if you can put yourself into the shoes of the woman you're connecting with, or even if it's hard for you to do that, if you can put your shoes in, how would I feel about a woman in my life that I love and respect and know being put in this situation right now, how would I feel? Like, that empathy is so important. I think where intention is good, actions that follow are usually in good spirit.
I agree with you, and I think that that entitlement piece is important. What I've got here, right, is the problem, and we wrote down here. Firstly, the problem is we need to define the boundaries of assault, which we've done. We've looked at the pyramid, which is great. But to segue off what Brad's just said is there's also a problem around emotional intelligence. As young men, exercising that emotional awareness and intelligence to go, this feeling of like, well, I'm here and I'm like turned on and I want to have sex, is a very like undeveloped level of emotional maturity. To exercise a level of maturity where you can have empathy for another person, that is progressing in emotional intelligence and maturity.
I think just on that, I can't remember where I heard it, but I think on average women have 50 extra EQ points than men on average.
Oh, we know that. That's for damn sure. So I think that's why it is so important to, and I've got a younger brother, I've got 2 nephews and potentially another nephew on the way. I now have a responsibility as someone who exercises self-awareness and emotional intelligence, and it's something I value, to try to impart these, I guess, values and these ideas onto the young men in my life to go, hey, how would that make you feel if you did that? Because then as you gain in emotional intelligence and awareness, you now have an understanding of your feelings. And this is getting real like progressive of me. But what if it was to have a whole cohort of the next generation of men who actually understood their feelings?
Uncle Woo Woo Joey.
Whoa. And it sounds so woo, but it's not even woo woo. Like, let's just actually tap into how we're feeling. And I knew, and I've spoken about it on the podcast, until I was about 20, early 20s, I felt like I had about 4 emotions, happy, horny, hungry, frustrated, and like never really angry, never really sad. It was like really a shallow depth of emotions. Robotic. And it's just like, deepen your emotions, understand that those feelings are okay to have, and then what can we do with those feelings? And I think that's such a key part, because
I think the messaging around this has got to be super clear and transparent to young boys as well. Like, I think it's toxic and harmful to try and shame them for being horny, for being aggressive, for having angry thoughts. Like, all those things are natural. You just need to give them the tools or the ability to work with them.
That part.
Trying to turn the tap off on it doesn't work. It's only going to come out in worse areas. And I think that's when you will get like the top of the pyramid, those things happening or occurring. I think it's, bringing awareness to it and teaching young boys how to do this in a healthy way, but not shaming them into feeling unhuman for having these emotions.
And that's where I'm getting to, is having an awareness of your own feelings to go, I feel this, but then also having the tools, the resource, and education to go, I feel this, and now I do this to help soothe that feeling. I feel angry. Well, what do you do with that anger? We know we don't suppress it, because that doesn't work. We know we don't take it out on the drywall, or we don't take it out on our sibling, or to extrapolate even further, we don't take it out on our partner. What do we do with this feeling of anger or frustration that you might have as a man? Well, we need to exercise it healthily and in a controlled manner. For a lot of men, and in my personal experience, exercise is great for anger, for aggression, for pent-up frustration. Let's exercise. Let's do some rigorous exercise.
Sport, martial arts, exercise.
Sport, martial arts, running. Like, this is my toolkit to deal with certain emotions. I feel sad. Well, what do you do with that sadness? You know what I do? I communicate it. I talk about it. Again, we don't suppress it, because we know what that does. It festers and it projects as some weird toxic fucking projection that usually hurts people, yourself and other people. Sadness, anger, confusion, fear, insecurity. I feel like until you have an awareness of these emotions and you know how to express them in a controlled manner and you have a safe environment to do that, it gets fucking messy. And that messiness looks like potentially the crisis that we're talking about today on a grand scale. Frustration, fear, insecurity, and not knowing what to do with it usually harms people.
But yeah, as you said, I don't think I was 25 until I started realizing I had these emotions and I had to deal with them. Like telling a 15-year-old kid this, I don't know, well, the kids are probably a lot more emotionally intelligent than I was at 15, but this would have been a foreign language to me at 15. I
think so. Much like the idea of gay marriage was a foreign concept to our grandfathers until the conversation happens. Yeah, it's the progression of culture is that you have these conversations that are like, what? Gay marriage? No, that's not in the Bible. But now it's accepted. Like generally, obviously there's so much work to be done, but yeah, gay marriage is a thing and it's fine, and let people love. The same way that we can talk to 15-year-old kids now about, and Brad does it, literally goes into schools and talks to the kids about, hey, here's what resilience does. Here's what vulnerability does. Here's what honesty does. Here's what healthy masculinity looks like. That conversation can now be had. It might have been tough to speak to us as 15-year-olds in the school auditorium. We might have sniggered and laughed and disregarded the message. But I think now the message can be received better than it ever has.
This is the most thought that I've ever put into it. But I think at that age, that's a pivotal age to plant those seeds in young boys' heads. So I think if it goes untreated, I think most of them will default to their animal instincts, which is all the wrong things to do.
Unruly teenage boys are a dangerous breed. Teenage anything. Teenage apes, teenage lions, teenage anything without role modelship is or something to model healthy, controlled behaviour of is a dangerous thing.
Teenagers in groups specifically.
Oh, fuck yeah.
That's even worse.
And that looks like
I would consider myself as a 15-year-old to be a reasonably good kid, but put me with a group of 10 of my mates and I'm doing the dumbest shit you can think of.
Can I ask you both a question?
Sure.
At that age, in your teen years, as a man, who did you idolise? Who did you look to as your role models at the time?
I love this. I know where you're going with this. We're moving into role model shit, and I love it. I'd
say,
I'll only
be quickly on this, but I'd say all my role models were like men that were traditionally manly men, in the sense that like the men that I looked up to didn't cry, they didn't talk about their emotions. If they had a problem, like there was physical violence, like that was kind of the general consensus of the role models that I looked up to, because there wasn't anything else for me to look up to. And I grew up in an environment where if I was vulnerable, if I was sensitive, if I couldn't fight, then I was even more exposed to the negative consequences of my environment, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I just doubled down on all the stuff that made me somewhat feel bulletproof.
Yeah.
What about you, Joey?
For me, obviously, I've spoken about it before, the context of growing up, father not present, single mother. I don't know, until like I didn't really feel the effects of not having a father figure in the home, where I was like yearning for this male role model figure. So I don't know if this is a strange answer, but I kind of looked up to my mum, because she was exhibiting like strong masculine qualities in that she was the keeper of the house. She went out and worked a corporate job and came home and she's wearing a suit, but then she's also cooking us dinner and tucking us into bed. So I modeled some of my masculine characteristics off of how I was seeing my mum operate, which was a woman operating kind of in a healthy masculine way. And she was doing that out of necessity as a single parent. But directly, maybe my mum. Indirectly, I'm looking at people like athletes. I was a sports kid. You know, I was heavily into sports. And so whether I knew it or not, I wanted to be the cool, flashy, confident kid that had the bright shoes and the headband on, because I was looking at the athletes, the Ronaldinhos. I was looking at Gael Monfils in tennis. I was looking at those types of people, I suppose. So yeah, if I was to boil it down, not that I ever had this one where I was like, oh, that's my role model. I guess I kind of just pieced together a mixture between seeing how mum showed up in the world, and then I was just busy playing sport. So I guess a lot of athletes, maybe the older cohort of guys, you know, the first graders, when I'm playing under 15s, watching the first graders play, and that probably had a big effect on me. But it was hard to pinpoint one role model, to be honest.
I think it's a really relevant topic, because I think about myself as a teenage boy, and I idolised sports stars because I wanted to be an athlete. I wanted to be masculine. I remember walking around at 16 going, tell you what, if I hit this weights hard, next couple of years I'll look like Sonny Bill. Still far from it.
The dreamer.
So disappointing.
He'd look like a 6'5" Polynesian man.
But I am so lucky that my old man was everything I could ever hope to be in a man when I grew up, because he had my dad is, you guys know Big Daz. He's strong, he's muscular for even now in his late 50s. He's still built well, he's still fit. But every day as a kid growing up, even as a teenager, my old man would drop me off to school and give me a kiss on the head when I was 16. I'd give him a cuddle, I'd tell him I love him. Like, we had a beautiful relationship in which we could be really open and emotional with each other. And so for me, I was able to access that emotion, but also look to someone who exhibited every masculine trait I could have ever wanted to hold as a grown man myself. But I think for a lot of these young kids, and it's natural as a guy, especially when you're going through puberty and you have so much testosterone fueling what you're becoming and who you are, you want to be masculine. You want to express that. You want to understand how to express that. And if you lack good, honest, masculine role models, you look to things that are masculine but don't have developed emotional intuition or emotional like EQ. And so, I was thinking about a few examples of this, and I heard two stories recently that I think, one's actually a quote that I want to share, and one's a story that I think are really important to mention. I heard a beautiful quote. I can't remember the gentleman who said it, but it seemed to really resonate. He said, men who don't know how to articulate how they feel often turn to violence. And that's what you guys were speaking about before, like understanding how to express the natural aggression that you have.
I think I said they would default to animal instincts, something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, so if you don't know how to articulate it and share how you feel, out of frustration, you often turn to aggression, right? And it's why when you see an argument between two guys occur where communication lacks and the ability to express how they feel lacks, the noise gets louder, and all of a sudden it's a yelling match.
Slam poetry.
Yeah. And you see this inside relationships too, in the male-female dynamic, where they don't know how to articulate how they feel, stepping into the masculine aggression and frustration from both parties. The loudness of that argument picks up until the point where it's a screaming match and nothing gets solved, right? And so I think learning how to articulate your feelings is really important, and this is a big part of encouraging in schools and in young men vulnerability and honesty and communication, the skills in that. But then I heard this story from, I think, who would arguably, God, I'm stumbling my words there, be a masculine role model for a lot of young men at the moment in former UFC middleweight champion Sean Strickland. This guy who's known to step into the ring and be incredibly aggressive and to push forward and to stand in this very tall figure and fight and throw hands, and he loves to bang, and we see all the footage of him sparring and he's never not 100% throwing his hands and throwing himself into confrontation, and he's a naturally confrontational and aggressive person in press conferences and wherever it may be, and he quite freely speaks his mind sometimes without even thinking about the consequences. And this is a guy who obviously at some points in times, and I think he'd be happy to put his hand up here, say that he struggles with his emotional intelligence in certain situations. But he shared his story on Theo Von's podcast. And everyone up until this point had seen this guy who was, very much so the stereotypical male fighter. This guy who's an animal in the cage. And he's sitting there on Theo's pod talking about his childhood and his upbringing and how he grew up in a household which was very low socioeconomic. They really struggled financially. He talks about having a father who was incredibly abusive towards his mother and to them as children. He talks about being the younger of two brothers who was almost raised by his older brother but also beaten by his older brother because he was basically manipulated to do things emotionally around the home.
It almost sounds like David Goggins' upbringing.
Very similar, right? And he speaks about crawling under his mum and dad's bed of a night as an 8-year-old boy being eaten by fleas under the bed because of the poverty they grew up in, but sitting there and listening and sleeping on the floor to hear when his dad attacked his mum, he could try to save his mum's life. This is an 8-year-old kid growing up in this environment. He talks about one night in particular, his dad kicked him out of the room and he sneakily army crawled back under the bed, and about an hour later his dad attacks his mum, starts strangling her, saying, "I'm going to fucking kill you." And he gets from under the bed, grabs the first thing he can find, which is a guitar in the corner of the room, smacks his dad over the head and knocks him out. And talk about an 8-year-old kid existing in this environment. He talks about having a grandfather who was essentially a neo-Nazi, a racist, just a horrible man who, you know, he grew up in that environment. So as a young kid, how does he show up at school? He shows up as a racist. He gets kicked out of school at 12 for the day, or for a suspension period, for a hate crime at school. And he stumbles his way that day, with the free time he has, into an MMA gym. He talks about getting the shit beaten out of him at that first day and lying in bed that night. It's the first time he's ever felt happy. Why? Not because he had the shit beaten out of him, but because he got the aggression within inside of himself out in a controlled manner. And for the first time, he's able to see life through somewhat clear eyes, that I am just so hurt and so pent up inside because of what I'm experiencing. I don't even believe the things I'm saying at school. I don't believe that any of that's right, but I need to learn how to channel this. And I'd argue that that guy there who's learned how to channel, and this is why I think martial arts is so important for young men, and even any form of team sport or sport in which they're encouraged to get aggression out in healthy ways and to compete and to almost leave the shit that they're facing in real life behind for a moment to compete and to get it out of themselves, is if we don't teach them how to channel it, that hatred, that anger inside is built up. There's no way to express it that isn't unhealthy. And so I think of a guy like him, and I can't speak to his character, I don't know him personally, I know him as an athlete, but I think about without fighting, without that sport that allowed him to channel that feeling, to get it out, who would he have become?
It's a scary thought from someone from that upbringing. I think, let's not get it twisted. We're not making excuse for the behavior of men because of, or anyone, because of potentially their upbringings. That means it's okay for them to be these violent perpetrators in situations. That's not the message, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brad. That's not the message we're portraying. Portraying is how important it is to have an avenue to express that pain and that hurt, especially if you come from environments that are so damaging and traumatizing.
You're certainly correct there, Joey. And I think the other thing is, and it's very easy to say because I'm not a father yet. I hope to be in the coming years. But please, for any of the dads that are listening to this, think about how you can be. And for us as young men, for anyone who's listening to this, who has the opportunity to be a healthy role model to someone, even if it's just one person, even if it's a younger brother, a younger friend, your mates in your group now, whether it be your son, a nephew, like you mentioned before, Joey, like how can you be a healthy role model for that human being? How can you make sure that when they step into the shoes that you're in right now at this age with this responsibility that we have as partners, as brothers, as cousins, uncles, whatever it may be, that we can be the role model that those people need? And I think it's showing up, great example, just as a little sidebar here, Braithen Astor and another gentleman, Sean McEnroy, I believe I said his last name correct there. Braith's a former NRL player. Sean's a absolute strength wizard and powerlifter, and they've got a platform called Strong Dad. It's all about encouraging men to get in the gym, respect their body, get themselves in good physical shape, learn how to express their masculinity and look after themselves so that they can show up in the world as good fathers. Man, this is so important. You know what I mean? So important to give them something to look to that is a strong example of how you can actually channel masculinity and show up in the world as a good man.
I think that's how, I guess, culture changes over time. It is these being a role model for someone, having these conversations. I think this is kind of the fabric for how culture can change over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with the sentiment of both of you guys there. Under the dot point here, what can we do? That was a point which we've just talked about, role modelship. And I wrote here, younger, impressionable men and boys need to have safe and healthy behaviours modelled to them. And that is our responsibility right now, right here. So to talk about a potential other solution, if I may.
Maybe just on that, I wrote a quick letter to... this is
nice.
my message to a 15-year-old boy. So I wrote this morning. I haven't even proofread it, but this is open for discussion at the end to see if you agree or disagree.
Do it live.
I try to put... I'll just go for it. It's not your fault that you wake up every morning at the Hard Rock Cafe, but it's your responsibility as a young man to deal with this in a healthy manner. Being horny isn't toxic. Having sex drive isn't toxic. Having angry or aggressive thoughts isn't toxic, but you need to understand if these things go unfiltered, they can lead to bad places. Women in love have the ability to make you feel feelings that you won't be able to put words around. And it's in these moments it's critical that you don't let your animal instincts take over. Women naturally have a default emotional intelligence that is superior to yours. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're losing the ability to think straight, leave the situation until your nervous system resets. Boys will be boys isn't an excuse for sexual assault, but don't feel any shame for wanting to do quote unquote boy shit. It's your responsibility to channel this energy and make sure it comes out in a healthy way. Sports, martial art and business are good avenues to let this out. As a young man, it's your role to protect females. As a young man, it's your role to protect females and take ownership in creating an environment where females feel safe and call out sexual assault when you see it. It's not your fault that you have all this testosterone running through your system, but it's your responsibility to use it in a healthy way. Do no harm, take no shit.
I
genuinely love that, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It's almost like a how-to guide, as in how to understand what's happening right now as a 15-year-old kid.
It's such a confusing and volatile time. You've basically got the makings of a man's body, but you've still got a kid's head.
Yeah, the capability of young men in their teenage years physically is quite astounding. Like we look at athletically, it's a point in which they're starting to enter that prime, and some men develop younger than others. But we look at examples of young men who are 18 entering the NRL, and they're able to do things physically that you wouldn't think are possible against grown men, but they're essentially grown men with a lack of emotional intelligence at this point in time. And I think that's natural, but
which means they'll do backflips to catch a kick over the sideline,
sure.
risking a neck break for a try.
For sure.
Once that prefrontal vortex starts to develop,
Probably not cortex.
Sometimes it is a vortex. Who knows what's going on?
That actually makes more sense.
You're probably not going to do some dumb shit. So
my prefrontal vortex is another tornado.
No, I think that was a beautiful way to finish that, Foons.
Yeah, I think
I like that, Foons.
The messaging or marketing campaign that comes from this, it can't be that men being horny, having sexual urges, like that's not toxic, and that labeling, I think in the long run will do more harm for both boys and girls. Like I think it's, instead of shaming men into feeling how they feel, they need to be taught how to deal with it in a healthy manner.
Yeah, it's emotional control.
And I think, I don't know if it's post Me Too movement, but like the whole toxic masculinity, I don't think that's healthy. Like saying that masculinity is toxic, I don't think that's healthy.
And I think we'll get there to the not helpful solutions. Can I just offer I guess a couple of options for the solutions or things that are still helpful if we want to stay in that space for just a little bit. So we've touched on it, so I'll just breeze over it. The idea of culture, right? So we speak about locker room culture, or boys will be boys culture, or and if you expand it to culture at large, it's no secret that we have been living in a man's world, a patriarchal society where it's designed for ultimately men to succeed oftentimes women to have a more difficult, I guess, experience to be offered the same opportunities for success. That's kind of like agreed upon. But as culture changes and we speak about equality and we speak about equality of opportunity and equality of everything across the board, we're now looking at things start to like it takes so much time, because now after fighting for 50, 100 years, only now we're starting to see some sort of shift towards a more equal playing field in a whole area. And I think that's what is kind of happening now. We speak about this crisis within Australia as if it's this thing that has just like popped up. It hasn't just popped up, but it now has some exposure and limelight as an issue that has existed, for so long, probably.
I'd almost say the dawn of time.
For the dawn of time. And that I feel as if a cultural shift is happening to the point where it's so loud now that conversations are being had that in time will change the trajectory for women in these oppressed and dangerous and violent situations. That to me is the role of culture. So we speak about a solution as in, well, this is a woman's problem with a man's solution. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think this is a human problem that's affecting both genders to different degrees, affecting us as men, not poor me men, but affecting us as good men, being like, wait a minute, I haven't raped anyone, and now I'm like, I can't open the door for a woman, or, you know, feeling the effects of this oppression across the board. So it's hard for me to say that it's one gender's problem, another gender's solution. I think it is, in my opinion, a cultural problem with a human solution. And that human solution comes in the form of us going through what we're going through today. And without divulging too much personal information, there's a crazy personal statistic of mine that almost every woman in my life that I've been close to, family, relationship, otherwise, has had an experience with the nature of the things we're talking about today, be it sexual assault or otherwise. And it is astounding that almost every woman, friends as well, that I speak to go, yeah, like I do have a story about the time that this happened, or I have an extreme example of this. And so I think it breaks my heart when I see people close to me have these experiences. And I put my hand up and go, okay, whilst I'm not a perpetrator of this type of behavior, I'm taking accountability and responsibility of what can I do here. Mm-hmm. And then second to that, I try to offer control and empowerment to the women that are suffering at the hands of people that are taking away that control, and ask them, what can you do to protect yourself and make yourself safe here? And without sounding like I'm victim blaming, because I'm almost trying to tiptoe around this, there's a level of responsibility that I try to offer to these women that I care about, to say, what role do you have in this situation right now? Because there is a role, and that's not to blame you, but it is to empower you to go, okay, what can I control here? And sometimes it's only a small window of opportunity that you can control, but identifying where you do have the control in this situation, and then having a safe place, an environment that we try to cultivate as brothers, partners, cousins, whatever it may be. I want you to try to find where that control lies, because my job is to create a space, a culture, and an environment where you can exercise that control, where you are not powerless to the situation in the environment, where it is something, for example, like partner selection, having an awareness around the environments you're placing yourself in, or the potential place you're meeting a man in. And this is easy for me to say as a man that hasn't got the same threats, but understanding the dangers you're putting yourself in if you're meeting certain types of men in certain areas, and the potential risks that might come with that. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, what responsibility can be held from you what accountability can be held from you. The same way, Brad, I'm not sure if you said it on there or just before we hopped on, the idea that Chanel Conti, a woman, prevalent voice in this space, put her hand up with accountability and said, you know what, I've been a part of the problem too. I've even engaged in slut shaming and I've engaged in this type of damaging behavior. So as a woman being accountable, go, well, I actually participated in this culture too. So it's not a woman problem, not a man problem, not a woman solution, not a man solution. It's a culture solution. Where can you empower yourself to go, well, you know what? As a human being, I'm not going to participate in this culture. And as a victim, where have you got the control to empower yourself to exercise that control? Again, I'm rambling, but I've just written here the idea of partner selection, even having the ability to speak to good men to gain a man's perspective on relationship dynamics, creating a landing, as men, for us, creating a landing pad that is effective as possible so that if women that are close to us find themselves in this situation, they have a place to go to safety in the presence of men, because the fear of men oftentimes means that there's nowhere to go. Like,
do you reckon women are speaking up about this so prevalent at the moment because they don't feel they have that space at the moment? It almost feels like they're trapped, if I had to put myself in a female perspective.
I think they're 100% feeling trapped, and I think they're 100% feeling like they're lacking the support of men, and the support of good men, because obviously the face of their perpetrators is men. So what am I going to go to the person who's perpetrating this violence on me? I'm going to feel safe to go to a man? No, I don't feel safe in the presence of men. So creating that safety by being good men that can create and hold space for women who have had experiences at the hands of men, I think is so important for us. But it also is this, I guess, like a knee-jerk reaction to being, and we've seen it with the movement with toxic masculinity and the shift of I guess we look at the dating, you hear about statistics around dating and less men and women are dating and relating, and it's because there's been this like gross mistrust of men because of the way that culture has operated for the last 200, 300, 400,000 years, who knows? And now it's like, let's create some safety, let's create some support, let's create an environment where men can be trusted, but also let's create a platform where women can empower themselves by I guess partner selection is the one that comes to mind. Because sometimes I just think people, I'm like, oh, yeah, that you were able to get away from that situation, and then you've selected a partner that has perpetrated the same, and it's a pattern that I'm not blaming you for, but it's just like, what can I do as a man to be like, hey, here's a red flag. I know as a man, I can see the shit that's happening. You might not be able to see it, but like, that's a red flag in a man. That's a red flag in a man. That's a red flag in a man. Like, help me help you. Maybe me put my foot in it, but there is a responsibility us as humans to help this problem, I think.
Let me ask this question, because I think this is really interesting, and it just come to the forefront of my mind that there was a really scary statistic, and I think scary for very honest reasons. There's a scary statistic that something like somewhere between 30, and I know this is a big range, but somewhere between 30 and 50% of men in the US report that they were sexless last year, in the last 12 months, right? And I think that as a guy, you spoke to it earlier, Foons, there's almost a feeling of when you see what's happening in the media and you hear or you see the title, this is a male problem, or you see there's a sign that went viral at a recent parade, a rally, stating men are like mushrooms, dangerous until proven otherwise. As a man, you can feel like that men are under attack. And
I started the conversation, like when I first seen this stuff coming up, I couldn't help but feel defensive.
And I'm not, let me tell you here, I'm not trying to be insensitive, because I definitely don't feel like I'm the victim here, right, as a bloke. But I know that there would be a number of men who are going, hold on, I haven't had sex in the last year. I don't have a female partner. I'm not getting any interest on dating apps or online, on social media. There are no women in my life that seem to be interested in me, but I feel like I'm being targeted as the offender of all of these actions, be it sexual, emotional, physical violence, that I'm not even in connection with females. And so I'm really, one of the things that I think, and I love you've said this on our masculinity episode, Foons, you spoke about this idea that you hate that the conversation online always comes to competition between men versus women. Like it's this men versus women, women versus men. Women respond to men, men respond to women, instead of this collaboration of, like we spoke about, that beautiful, those beautiful thoughts you gave before, Joey, around this is a human problem. Human, like we're all human. You said it, Fins, we want to exist. It'd be crazy not to want to exist in this space in which, as a man, the women in your life feel safe. You know, that as a man walking down the street, I walk down the street and I almost feel like when I'm walking towards a lady, I'm trying to like be as like smiley and as like seem as like decent as I possibly can, because I don't want her to feel uncomfortable. And like I'll, g'day, how you going? Have a lovely day. Like I'm going out of my way to try and be nice, because I almost feel like as a guy, I'm terrified that I'm going to be put in that basket as you're not a good person, or that someone would feel uncomfortable around me, because I would hate to be seen as part of the problem that I don't believe I am. And I think we have to do a better job online. And I know this is easier said than done, but I love what you said, Joey, about for the women out there, we'd love you to communicate with us. I think goes for saying that most men would love you, most men who you know, who you're comfortable with, be it your fathers, your family, your friends, would love to hear from you about the things that we can do to make you feel more comfortable, to support you, because I think men often feel like they're being spoken to through social media and through the news in a way that isn't helping them. They're being told that they're the problem.
It's so flagrant.
They're not being told how they can be a part of a solution.
Yeah.
And so this is where I think conversation is so important. Conversation being not speaking to other people, but having a conversation with other people. Here's where we're going wrong. Here's how we can improve. Because a lot of what I see online, I don't think is healthy for creating collaborative change.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the idea of we can sit here as three guys and speak to three guys. And I might have even misspoke in trying to have an opinion and perspective for here's what women should do. They should, like, maybe that's not my place. So help us as good men. Help us.
Help us help you.
Help us help you. And also come to the table with team solutions that aren't demonizing men as blankets. And that might be so hard to do because, like, if someone's hurt you, how hard is it to be empathetic with that person? It's damn near impossible sometimes. So,
Put this out there. I'll speak on behalf of men for this whole problem. What I'm about to say. If a girl come to me with a problem, or come to me saying a guy is mistreating me or not treating me well, I reckon if a girl was to approach 90%, 95 or even more percent of men in society and say, guys treat me wrong, I reckon 95% of guys would be receptive to help you.
Yeah, see, I don't...
I
personally agree with that.
I don't have the stats. That's just me going purely off of vibes.
I think this is you going off existing in a group of optimistic men. We had this conversation the other day.
Yeah, but as a man, if a girl come to you and ask for help, a guy was harassing me or doing something wrong, how could you not help her?
So let me give you an example.
As a woman, their lived experience might be like, well, 90% of the guys I've ever
the reason I'm saying that is to say,
have,
like, feel safe to come to us and ask for
Correct.
help.
This is where I think it gets tricky though, right? So I completely agree from my perspective with what you're saying, that I would want to help. Right, I got caught in one of these situations the other day.
Yeah, speaking of
terrifying for me. Terrifying is maybe an extreme word. uncomfortable for me, but it felt like the right thing to do. And I'll dive into that in a second. But I know, and I've heard this from women in my life, that when they've called out this kind of behavior before, men have willingly looked to the floor and walked away.
No support.
Because they didn't want to be in an uncomfortable conversation where they had to call something out that potentially put their jobs at risk. Or
maybe that was me being a bit rosy.
I get why you say that, because I'm naturally optimistic too. But let me explain to you what happened to me the other morning.
This is the perfect example of what we're speaking about.
We had a coffee and conversation on Friday morning about all of this. We spent 2 hours together, and I felt so optimistic leaving that conversation about the fact that as three guys from different backgrounds, around a similar age, who exist in different environments outside of our friendship, of course, we want to improve what's currently happening and create safer environments for women. 2 hours later, I'm at work. I work pretty close to home. And I left my car at home that day, and I was going to walk back home to my car, which is about a 5-minute stroll, to head off to an appointment. So I'm leaving work with my water bottle, notebook in hand, ready to go to an appointment, looking like a very modern man in a nice cardigan and strolling down the street, minding my own business, with my headphones in, listening to a podcast. And as I'm walking down the street, I hear like a gut-curdling scream. And I turn around and am immediately just like shocked by the sight of a woman, and quite a short, small woman for that matter, absolutely running for her life, screaming, with a guy who's far bigger than I am, chasing her at full pace. And within a split second of seeing this, I've seen him grab her by the ponytail and like reef and pull her back and stop her in her tracks. And he's in her face. And my immediate reaction, without a single thought, like I think everything is unconscious at this point in time, I sprint in that direction. I'm probably 60 meters away from them. And as I'm sprinting towards them, I'm at full pace. I see another gent that I work with run out of the office. I see another one or two of the girls. And to be honest, I am so at this point involved in just getting to her, this victim, immediately, that I can't even tell you which girls I work with that walked out of the office. And one other lady on the street who's there with her maybe 1-year-old baby on her shoulder, who's close by, move in that direction. And as this guy spots me running towards them, he takes off. My first response, knowing that he's now about 50 meters in the other direction, is to stop and check on her. And she's obviously very upset, quite loudly crying, I guess shocked herself, in fight or flight. And I say to her, "Are you okay? Has he hurt you? Is there anything? Do you need me to call an ambulance?" And she says, no, I'm okay. And she tries to downplay the situation. And I said to her, and I hear out of the sort of like from the background, Christian who I work with say, "Are they her kids?" And then I look in the direction of this man, the perpetrator, who's now 60 meters away, and I see a double pram. And so I repeat to her, "Are they your kids?" To which she says, "Yes, one of them's my child." And then I said, "And is that your partner?" And regrettingly, she says, "Yes." And so I say, "I want you to stay here. I'm going to look after you and I'm going to keep an eye on your kids to make sure that they're close. Can you please stay here for me? You're not safe in front of him." And then I say to Christian, "Are you calling the police?" And he says, "Yep, I've got the police on the phone." And this is all happening within the matter of 30 seconds. And then he yells out, "You better fucking come here, you bitch. I'm not going to fucking prison again. I'm taking the fucking kids and taking all of the money out of the fucking account if you don't come back to me." And I understand this is a confronting situation for anyone who's ever experienced this. So please, if at any stage in this story you need to skip the next couple minutes of the podcast, feel comfortable to do so. But as I hear that, I recognize a few things. And you're in a heightened state of awareness when you're in one of these situations. If you're coherent enough and conscious enough to be there in that experience. And I'm recognizing at this point in time a few things. He's mentioned, "I'm not going back to fucking prison." He's mentioned the threat of, "I will take your children and I'll take all of the money out of your account," her livelihood, her ability to survive. And so I can understand that her natural instinct as a mother is to want to move back in that direction and allow him to exist in a way that he continues to perpetrate and abuse her physically and however else. Because he's emotionally abusing at this point too, right?
Sorry to interject, the psychology of that, he's hitting her empathy. She might be an empathetic personality trait. Like, don't send me back to prison. I'm not going back to prison because of you, making it her fault. The financial manipulation, I'm stealing all our money. And then to play on the maternal instinct of her, I'm taking the kids. How can you possibly expect one battered woman to have the strength in a situation like that to not feel like she has no other option but to go back to that man?
You know, and
it's like it's deeper than as if you'd go back to him. He just grabbed you by the hair and he's bashed you. Like, do you know how like deeply psychological those three things are? That's insane.
You know, going through my head at the time is immediately she walks towards him. You know, being a mother, like, it's an incredibly courageous thing. Her thing is protect my children at all costs. She goes to walk towards him. And I think through my head, for her to have run the way that she's run, I haven't seen what occurred before that. But this is, you know, the hair pull was not the only bit of violence that occurred in that situation, right? She's obviously terrified to run in the first place.
Some slight background. This is virtually the main street of Wollongong where this is occurring. So
correct.
This is
There's
occurring
people
in broad daylight.
Everywhere. This is 11 o'clock.
Yeah, imagine what's happening behind closed doors.
Correct, right? And so as she proceeds to go to walk towards him, I stop her and I say, I can't let you walk towards him. I'm going to make sure that your kids aren't taken away, but I need you to stay. To which he sees me step in and he yells, if you take another fucking step in my direction, you fuckwit, I'm going to fucking crack your skull open, cunt. And so I now know this guy's serious. He was already serious, but this guy now intends to not only harm his partner, but he'll harm anyone who gets in the way of him getting what he wants. And my immediate reaction is you almost go to be aggressive, be like, that isn't going to help the situation. I try to calm him. Correct. I try to calm him. Mate, I need you to calm down. I'm just trying to make sure your partner's okay. I'm trying to make sure that the kids are okay. I just need you to relax. We're not going to get into a confrontation here. Just please relax for me. Now, he's still about 50 metres away at this point. I'm trying to keep distance between him and her. And then the police are on the phone and I say to her, can you please come in and take a seat in our office? And I try to resolve this, but I need you to be safe. And the girls and Christian, they're doing something behind me, but I'm keeping my eyes on him at all times. And then he goes, fuck it, I'm leaving with the kids. He starts to walk away. She naturally runs towards them. So I chase after her, put my hand in front of her. And I can't even remember minute details of this because it's all happening so quick. To then, which he turns again. Listen here, cunt, you take another step, I'm going to fucking crush your skull. Then he sprints at me. And she naturally, out of panic, I can't blame her, runs back in the other direction. And now I'm 10 yards away from this guy. He's closing. And I immediately just kind of put my hand to feel that she's behind me. And I'm in front of this guy face to face. And he does almost, you know, there's the Ali shuffle. There's also the junkie shuffle where two hands up in the air, they shuffle. And he's going, come on, cunt, let's crack on, let's crack on. And I'm like, mate, I need you to calm down. And I've just got I'm not presenting in a stance like hands up, like let's fight, but I'm presenting like hands out horizontal in front of me, one leg back so I know I can use it to create distance if I need to. But I'm just two hands in front of me, just signaling like almost a calm down, but also like feeling the distance out, just keeping him outside of my reach. And I'm looking at this guy and I'm predominantly recognized as a tattoo on his face, but I couldn't tell you what the tattoo was because I'm more so focused on, I can see his pupils are really dilated. And so I'm signaling in my head, as a guy who grew up with a father who's a copper here, I've heard about this behaviour. This guy's likely on methamphetamines, which means he's probably far stronger than he's normally capable of being. He's also incoherent. He's obviously making decisions. There's something psychologically wrong there for us to be in this situation in the first place. He's also identified that he won't go back to prison. So for this guy here, it's kill or be killed. because he doesn't want to go back to a place in which he doesn't want to be. So right now, if I'm the person between him and prison, he's going to do whatever he can to get me out of the way and get his partner back so that she doesn't go to the police. And so I'm trying to calm him, and I'm watching his hands. And I think after about a minute of me and this guy back and forth, me trying to calm him, he recognises that I'm not going to engage in throwing a first punch, and I'm not going to counter his aggression with aggression, that I'm naturally relatively calm compared to him, and that I'm also not going to move out of the way of him getting to his partner. So he decides to turn, run back to the pram, and push it away with these kids. Now, at this point in time, I've got everyone yelling at me to get back, to bring myself out of danger, but it's like, I'm not going to turn my back to someone who's violent either. And I'm also not trying to be a hero. Like, I'm not calm under the surface. I'm also like, there's an element of fear, and like, I'm scared under the surface. This isn't a guy who, if he hits me and happens to land a great shot, has the mercy to stop and walk around me. Like, I'm being gutter stomped. He's been in prison for a reason. And so I'm not comfortable in this situation, but naturally my instinct is, as a capable man who had a conversation about this morning, I'm trying to help this woman. There's no other option right now but for me to control what I can control and try to de-escalate this situation.
And so speak about the environment, like, you know, Foon's alluded to the fact it's middle of Wollongong, middle of the day. Like, you the only bloke around, or what's going on?
Christian's on the phone to the police. There are, I can see from peripheral vision, people standing outside their office doors looking. I am, in all honesty, a little bit disappointed. Not that I would never expect anyone else to put them in the path of danger. This is obviously a man who has no regard for human health and safety. But I'll be honest, I'm a little bit disappointed that a guy who has thought it's right to step in and try and protect the woman who's been assaulted, that not another single guy at that point in time thought power in numbers, safety in numbers. Maybe we'll come and be a part of showing this gent that this isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
Because if I engage any further, like if I go and try to stop him from taking the kids away, we're throwing hands. When he's got a backpack on, I don't know what he's got in his backpack, whether there's a knife in there.
Shanked up.
Yeah, and so for me, I'm like, there's no part of me that is disillusioned to the fact that this guy has any form of good intention.
Yeah, 100% got to be as risk adverse in that case as you can, but I'd say you've gone above and beyond, and I don't think that would be expected of the common man to step into harm's way of a man that has obviously violent intentions.
Correct.
I guess that's where the disappointment lies, because all it takes is, I mean, to bring it back, to confront the bad behavior, whether it is, hey, I'm uncomfortable here, or get the fuck away from this girl that you've just assaulted. I'm not going anywhere, buddy. That confrontation piece is riddled in fear, anxiety, heightened awareness, all of that fucking emotion. You have to move through, because inaction only breeds more of that fucking feeling.
Maybe just say worst case scenario, something happened to Brad. We'd be having this same conversation in the same light.
Well, I think the conversation is you have to confront that. And the fact that Brad did it and the fact that no one else did it is the disappointment. Because if other people held the sentiment that I'm fucking scared right now, but I am going to confront this behavior to protect someone else, is like, what if 3 or 4 blokes were there? It's a very different dynamic, and it's a morally fucking right situation there. But when there's 2 or 3 capable people that are there, maybe filming with their phones or just watching because they're scared, Brad's scared. Everyone's fucking scared. The woman who just got fucking dragged back scared. If everyone's scared except for this methed up junkie, then that wins. And it's the same. You've heard it all before. If you see someone getting mugged in an alley, are you going to go and protect them? It's like, you can't blame anyone, but you just like to think that good would prevail there, and that maybe people can exercise the feeling, and maybe whether it's through doing combat, whether it's being in positions of, you know, competition or some sort of, have the ability that when it's fight or flight, that you can take a step forward in fear as opposed to freeze or step back, because it means that you can protect this woman. Easier said than done.
I will say that I think in this situation, there's two things. I recognise that she ends up running off with this guy after we're on the phone to the police in pursuit of her kids. I realise that I now can't see her across the road because they've crossed an intersection and run in that direction. And then I lose sight of them for a minute, but then watch the door of a public toilet close, one of those ones with the electronic push doors, and just see a similar coloured navy jumper to the one in which he had on, and thought they were hiding in the toilet. So I'm waiting outside the toilet. Like, we're trying to get it open. The police have arrived at this point in time. I'm asking a couple of people across the road if they've seen where they've gone. No one can see where they've gone. And I immediately feel guilty for having let them get out of sight in trying to help give a description of this guy over the phone so the police could come and pull him up. And we end up figuring out it wasn't them that was in the toilet. They disappeared.
Some poor bloke's in there doing a number 2.
Yeah,
he opens it up to the cops.
For sure.
You're just there like, get
For
out!
sure.
I'm not capable of violence.
He's like, mate, I had a bad curry for lunch. Give me a break.
And so I feel like incredibly guilty at this point in time. But it ends up being the case that after the police leave with my statement and my description of this guy, I decide that I don't feel comfortable going to my appointment till I do a lap around the block. And so I get in my car, do a lap around the block, and end up finding, I think, where would they naturally go? Train station or Piccadilly. And I find them in Piccadilly, but the cops have found them just before me, and they've got this guy in custody.
Yeah, okay.
And so I immediately, it's a sigh of relief, and I give them a signal, that's him, out the window. And then I leave, and I immediately felt comfortable that it's now in the hands of the justice system. But then the first thing that comes to my mind is we obviously have a problem with the justice system at the moment, that, bail should be refused for anyone who has committed a violent act against their partner, because if he gets bail, what do you think he's going to do now? And also we need to do a better job at making sure these people can't exist in society after they've been caught and charged for violent acts like this. Because this is where one of the things that has been the headline of news articles and news stories across the country is that I think it's every 4 days a woman is murdered at the hands of a man. And I think it goes for saying in that majority of these cases are cases like the one that I experienced the other day, where a violent person is likely known to police. We always hear this thing, they were known to police. This isn't a police problem. This is a justice problem with the justice system, because police can only do their part to charge this person and to reprimand them for what they're doing. It is the justice system's job to keep these people behind bars so that the women can find safe refuge. We need to, as a country, provide safe spaces for these women to retreat to with their children, where they're going to be looked after, where they can have time to gather themselves and figure out their next step. And there's a bunch of organisations who are doing this, and I'll make sure that they're in the show notes for people who maybe are listening to this and are actually victims of violence in this manner, where organisations like Escabags and Rise Up who are doing incredible things. But I do recognise that in this area, doing as much as I can on that day, on Friday, my hands are tied to what happens next. And so there is a bigger issue that our country, our government, our politics need to handle. But I truly believe, and we've gone down a rabbit hole here, and I don't want to make this about me, but I truly believe, like we identified earlier in this episode, the things that we can have an impact on changing is, yes, we can be voices for what we expect from government. We can be voices to protest against what's happening and rally up in support of women who are experiencing this. But on a cultural level, there is so much that we can influence and change. And I would have loved if on that day, what was experienced there, even if it's for the men who were looking out office windows that day and didn't walk outside, I hope that you've had time to reflect and go,
I could have done more.
I could have done more. But I don't even think I'm not saying step in. I'm saying if you step out and there is a presence there on that day. Yeah, I chose to partake without any support. That is my choice. And I truly believe that, I don't want to sound heroic, because I genuinely think that had I have just stood by her and not engaged forward, I likely would have been in maybe not as much danger, but an equal amount of danger, because this guy was going to do anything to make sure that he got her back. He was going to do anything to make sure that she left that situation with him.
Yeah, I think
What's your
did
thoughts,
was
Vince?
above and beyond. Like, I don't think you can expect the common man to step in harm's way for someone that they don't even know. Like that guy, if there was someone there looking out the office window, he might even not be able to do 10 push-ups. He's not capable for combat. You can't expect that person to sacrifice their body for someone that they don't even know. Like, if that was a family member or someone you knew, I don't think you'd have an option. Like, your body would put you in there naturally.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. The guy who's never exercised.
Again, this is me speaking from someone who doesn't have their finger on the pulse.
No,
Yeah.
but I also
I
think
think it's the classic, like,
But then,
if I had to, I would. But would you? You don't know until you're in that position. And even if it's
I
like,
think most people freeze.
I think if you've never, you can't do 10 push-ups, and I don't know this chick, very justified to not do anything. I still can't do 10 push-ups, and now that's my daughter, or that's my, hey, stop doing that to my daughter. No. What are you going to do about it? I can't do anything.
I think these are probably extreme circumstances where, thank God, they don't happen every day.
I think, here's what I think. I'm not suggesting that I think anyone had to engage in the same level of conviction that I did to put myself between him and her.
Am I wrong in saying that this isn't an extreme case? That
It's a very extreme case, right? But I think had a bunch of men...
Not that it excuses in any way, but I don't think it's like you can't... Like, the cultural changes aren't going to stop this.
Yeah. Look, I think had a bunch of men stood outside of their offices and just been present, it likely would have changed the dynamic in him knowing that if he does anything stupid, not that he's completely coherent, but there's a bunch of men, like even just for me to know that if I'm engaging in that and I all of a sudden get hit and now I'm down for the count and I'm getting gutter stomped, that a bunch of people are going to step in
I can't help but think if something bad happened to you then, I definitely don't think the messaging from this would be like we expect boys to do more in that situation at all.
I agree. And I think you're acting through empathy. You can't turn a blind eye to what could have potentially happened. Yeah. And maybe
that guy had malicious intent. If he was going to touch her, it was to do damage.
Yeah. And look, I can look at the Bondi Massacre, for example, and, there's a bunch of guys who put themselves between a man with a fucking big knife and other human beings to try and stop him. And I think I can't even put my hand up and say I would do the same because I'm not in that situation. I think it's easy to say I would do this until you're there. I was just going
to say that. I was like, it's so easy to look at a video on social media and be like, oh, if I was that guy, I'd do that. And I'm like, no, you fucking wouldn't, bro. You'd be shitting yourself. You'd be thinking, how the fuck can I get out of here as quick as possible?
That's why I think for the potential person who was watching it unfold and decided not to do anything, obviously Brad took the extreme measure, to ask yourself, could I have done more? And that could I have done more would have gone, you know what, I was fucking frozen and I didn't want to be anywhere near that.
I think that's a
but just
question.
let me cook. It's like, could I have done more? Is the question. Brad's not saying you should have stepped to me and we should have both citizens arrested him. But ask yourself, am I comfortable with what I did? Could I have done more? And if you could have done more, what does that look like? Hey, I was actually frozen in fear and it's because I don't actually feel capable in my body. Maybe you should look at being physically capable in your body. Maybe that's what you take out of witnessing that experience. And that's what we talk about as developing ourselves as young men. The capability emotionally, physically, spiritually, to navigate the hardships of society, the world, when it throws us challenges like this. And I remember vividly as I think maybe a 16-year-old kid playing first grade. Oh, actually, I was watching first grade hockey. I probably would have been about 15 watching first grade hockey grand final. It was a classic Albion Park versus University of Wollongong. And Albion Park were known grubs. And you've had a whole day of grand finals and the hill is populated by Albion Park and then university fans are on this side. And by this stage, first grade grand final, you've got people who are 10 tins deep, 15 tins deep. And it starts to get really bad. It starts to get personal. It starts to get racial. It starts to get sexual. And I remember sitting there as a 15-year-old boy. It's not my responsibility to call out this, right? Sitting there and going, is no one calling out the fact that this drunk fan is like heckling, crossing the line way, like on the fence, trying to physically get at some of our players? No one? Every capable man there, and I don't blame them, sitting there just like, don't look over there, nothing to see. Let's not get involved. Again, I don't blame them, but I sat there feeling so helpless. And I thought to myself, if I was in that situation, I would want to be in a position where I could at least, taking into account the safety of the ones that I care about, going, hey, this is not okay. This needs to stop. Or putting in measures so that doesn't happen. That helplessness I felt then, I've been in other situations where I've felt like, am I going to be that frozen, helpless 15-year-old kid, or am I going to call this out? And so I've been in positions where I've been there, like protecting this person I don't know, calling out racism against a drunk, violent offender. And luckily for me, it worked out in my favor. But could it have not? Maybe not. Maybe so. But I almost don't want to be that helpless kid anymore. Maybe that's part of why I do jiu-jitsu. Maybe that's part of why I boxed. Maybe that's part of why I do a lot of things, is because I don't want to be that helpless person when it comes to people I care about, or even if I don't know them, being like, I can't do nothing. I don't want to be the guy that does nothing. I want to be the guy that moves forward, as Brad did, or as those people did in Bondi. Will I freeze if there's a guy with a knife? Probably. But will I learn to do everything in my power to be capable that if I have the courage to move forward, I can do that even in the presence of fear? That's what I want to do. So I'm not saying that everyone needs to step forward and take the knife off the wielding offender, but it's like, what can you do to promote a different culture? And sometimes that means being physically fit and able to protect ones who aren't.
It can be anywhere on a spectrum, from simply having a conversation up to how can I be a better man?
Yeah.
I also want to say that I recognise that the lens that you look through that and challenge that, Foons, is like from you flexing the empathy muscle. Because I know you as a man, and I know that had I been walking down the street with either one of you two at that time, it would have been a 3-on-1 situation, because I know how you guys operate. And so I understand where you're coming from for someone who is physically not capable. And I think you made some really good points there, Joey. And this is why I think in the media, when we attack masculinity as a whole, it's really dangerous, because let me tell you, I operated at that point in time in 100% masculinity. I had to, and so I think where we don't want to attack masculinity is to disempower men from being able to protect and being able to step in and be that almost that body that shows up when it's necessary. And and I recognise that this is the extreme level of the cases in which violence or sexual assault exists. But like, I just wonder, there's this thing called the bystander effect, where in situations where something extreme occurs, whether it be someone drops from a heart attack, or like Friday, someone's been physically assaulted in the street, that a lot of people don't call through to emergency operators.
So they think someone else
because they
is?
think, oh, of course someone else has done it.
Yeah,
it's this like almost expectation from the people around you to be the good person.
That occurs when there's a lot of other people around. If you're the only one there, I think your default is to call.
Correct.
If you're around a crowd of 100, you'd be like, oh, that's someone else will do it. It's not my responsibility.
And this is where
Same as someone else will jump in, someone else will stop.
And this is where I think, like, I did not hear a single... To be fair, and credit to the women around me, some women showed up in brave ways. I had a lady who had a baby on her shoulder who stepped in before I could get to this woman in the first case to check on her.
Oh, that bravery gave me goosebumps.
So brave. And she actually pulled me aside afterwards when I'd walked back in the direction of the office. And she said, I want to thank you so much, because so many men, where I've experienced this before, watch it happen. And that kind of broke my heart because I grew up with a dad who, as a copper and someone who was physically capable, we use that word again. I think this would be expected of any, I don't think this would be expected, I'll clarify, of any man. But I've watched my dad leap across fucking counters at Woolworths and chase groups of men out of a store for intimidating a female shop attendant. And being like 10, like, he's going to come back with the cash in a minute, just you hold tight. And everyone's like, nobody expected that of him, but everyone appreciated it because everyone else is frozen in fear. And it's why, you know, for me, it brought up maybe an uncomfortable realization that I felt more physically capable a couple years ago when I was training Muay Thai. I wasn't a fighter. I wasn't extremely physically impressive at Muay Thai. I was never engaging in hard sparring or anything of the kind. But knowing how to light spar and move around and be comfortable in front of guys who are bigger and more capable than me. And they, of course, have the empathy to know they're not going to attack a guy who's less... you guys do jiu-jitsu together, and it's this to and fro where there's respect in that space in 99% of cases. But I just felt so much more comfortable knowing how to do things like create distance, create a safe space for myself if I was engaging in something uncomfortable. And there's been times naturally, because this is life, where as a guy, you can be out in town, catching up with a few mates who are having some drinks or, you know, out at a club, out at a bar, and someone who's had far too many and isn't conscious of the damage they're creating, or maybe is and likes the idea of getting off on that fear that they create. I've been put in situations where I've been able to stay really calm and not engage in aggression, but know that I can protect myself enough to get myself out of a dangerous situation if need be, because I'm showing up a couple times a week and becoming more physically capable. And I left that confrontation on Friday like, ooh, I felt like I could handle myself there and like exist and step forward in the face of fear. But God, I wish I had the confidence I did a couple of years ago, because I would have felt so much calmer for everyone.
Yeah.
And so just for me personally, I'm not suggesting that anyone else has to do this, but I like the idea of being as physically as capable as I can be.
Yeah. Yeah. We've kind of taken a bit of a tangent, but I think still a useful tangent, and thanks for playing the devil's advocate there, Foons, because
I've been in, like, from 18 to 25, I literally seeked out male on male violence. Like, I've been in those situations. I can't even count on my hands and toes how many times, but I wouldn't expect the normal man to go forward in that situation.
That's interesting to me. You wouldn't expect them to, because you don't think that's how men are showing up in the world, or you don't think it's their responsibility to?
I think it's their responsibility too, but I don't think they're fit and able to. Like, the average man probably can't even do 15 push-ups these days. How can you expect him to go forward in combat?
Yeah, I think that's a problem.
And this might catch some shade from guys who are listening, and I think it's like anything, right? As if you're sitting there earlier in this podcast and you're hearing us talk about how the accountability around locker room chat, and you're like, well, hold on, I joke with the boys at gym about it, or at school about it, or at work about some sexual stuff, but like that doesn't make me a perpetrator. If you naturally feel that defensiveness and uncomfort in hearing that, you probably need to ask yourself the question and exist in a bit of empathy for a moment. Am I part of the problem here? If not, why did I feel so defensive about it? And at the same rate, if you're sitting there right now, uncomfortable with the conversation that we're having about how can you be physically prepared and physically capable to stand up where it's needed and necessary, and you feel defensive about that and you feel angry about that, ask yourself,
why?
Yeah, that was me at the start of the episode. When this first come up, I did feel defensive. Like, I don't...
As did I.
I don't do the extreme things like what am I doing that's wrong, or am I contributing to the problem? And as a 30-year-old man, when I look at that pyramid, I'd say I don't do any of those things now. I've naturally grown out of it, but definitely as a 15-year-old boy, that bottom tier I was definitely involved in that.
Yeah. And there is that feeling of defensiveness comes from a place of you're feeling threatened. You're feeling threatened in a degree, and asking yourself why? Like, what insecurity is being threatened? And it's like, well, I'm not that. well, then you explore it, explore that feeling. Because even maybe as you played the devil's advocate for and said, I wouldn't expect the common man to do that. I felt a defensiveness come up in me, being like, no, that's not right. Like, and I felt myself getting defensive because that was speaking to the insecurity of that 15-year-old kid who felt helpless when he saw wrongdoing happen. And now I'm like passionate about going, I don't want to feel like that again. So no, fuck that. You should move forward. And even though you're scared, still try to do the right thing. Even if it means it's a bit dangerous. Like, that's my response now, because it's me wanting to be that man as much as it is being afraid of not being that man, if that makes sense. It's like, and I don't have daughters, but imagine if you didn't have the fortitude, the courage, or the strength to stand up for what's right in the face of your daughters being something like that happening to your daughter. Whether you, like, a lot of people I think go, oh no, I would have acted differently if it was this situation or if she was my daughter. How do you know if you can't do it for a fellow man? Or in an example, hypothetical example, you're like, no, I don't think that's the way to act. In my head, it's like, you got to exercise that. Exercise that thought.
It takes emotional intelligence to know the difference between standing up when it's necessary and fighting a battle for your ego. Like, I don't think the message.
Absolutely.
I don't think the message here is you're out at a bar with your partner and some guy wolf whistles at her as you walk across the room, and of course it's wrong. We recognise it's wrong, but if you turn around and become aggressive, get yourself knocked out, and then your partner is in a violent situation, we've now got a problem where your ego got in the way of looking after the person you wanted to look after in the first place.
Yep.
I've
been in that exact situation.
We've all been there,
Yeah.
because naturally as guys you want to protect the person you care
the
about.
Perpetrator in those situations.
Yeah.
I'd do stuff like that. That's not like hoping to get a reaction
To bait
From
a
the
reaction.
guy. Yeah.
And I suppose that's where it comes into the emotional
just
intelligence
being young,
of it.
dumb was no excuse for my actions, but literally going out looking for violence, but against men, not that that's acceptable. But
Yeah.
I've been in those situations before where in the situation Brad was in, I'd like to think that I'd take the exact same scenario, but also have empathy for people that aren't fit and able-bodied. I wouldn't expect them to do that. Like, I'd like to think 9 out of 10 random people that you pull off the street I could beat in a combat fight. And like, I've not put me in any form of gym. Like, I'm definitely not at the top tier of anything, but I'd like to think that I'm more capable than the common man. And then I'm also emotionally intelligent enough to know that when I have someone coming at me very aggressive, not to fight back with aggression, be calm, cool, collective. Like, this isn't going to end well if I fight back with fire.
I think that's the emotional intelligence piece, because it can be as equally as damaging if you just, well, I know how to fight. Cool, but where's your emotional intelligence? Because your ability to fight might exacerbate a situation. Right. So it's like, it's the encompassed modern man of being like understanding your feelings, how to control your feelings, being composed in heightened situations, also being physically able.
Probably say I'm in a unique situation where I have a PhD in reading body language in those scenarios. Like, I'd feel very confident in that, in knowing what the other man might do.
A PhD, I like that.
Well, that's
what's that show? Not Indiana Jones. It's Dr. I'll butcher this, but anyway, he looks at, he goes, the pinky finger twitched, so I could see that his right hand was loaded, and then
Sherlock Holmes. Yeah, it's the Guy Ritchie piece where he's he calculates everything that could happen before it happens. Yeah.
I could tell he was squinting his right eye, so his right hand was loaded. It's like Foons is just calculating every moment.
Foons is the modern Sherlock Holmes. Yeah. Look, I think we obviously went down, I think, a very important tangent there, because it is very relevant to the topic. But are there any questions or ideas on your mind that you boys want to share before we get to a bit of a conclusion of the episode at hand?
Just in terms of the marketing message that would come from the masses in this, like, I don't think you can tarnish, like, the message of 15-year-old boys. You can't tell them that it's bad to have sexual energy, it's bad to be horny, it's bad to have angry or aggressive thoughts. Like, all that stuff is natural for a teenage boy. It needs to be education over suppression.
And I think it would be the same from the other side. Like, you can't expect young women to not be fueled by similar things, like wanting to engage in relationships and sexual conduct. And that's all part of growing up and being a young human being in society.
Speak from the male perspective,
For sure.
I can't speak from a female's perspective.
And I get what you mean there. I'm thinking from a media perspective. I don't think the answer is definitely not that we shame women for wanting to sexually engage with partners or be connected or to feel free and comfortable, which, you know, like, sex is a beautiful thing when it's, you know, done in the right spirit and with the right people. And so we should never discourage people from connecting. And the importance is, like we said, things around consent, emotional intelligence, in creating vulnerable and honest spaces for people. And so I love what you're saying here. Let's not create a media narrative that fuels competition between men and women, that fuels
divisiveness.
And I hate what I see in the media. I hate that we fuel divisiveness because it sells stories. We forget that the media is a business. And I think at the heart of the matter, it's a human problem, as you said before, Joey, and it's a solution that is going to be wrapped up in emotional intelligence and us going, how can we create better environments for each other? How can we all be a part of a solution? How can we be a part of a change in culture? How can we create an environment in which people feel safe and comfortable to enjoy their life? You know?
Touch on something that you said before. What was the statistic around, like, 50% of men haven't had sex in the last year?
It was somewhere between 30 to 50%, which is a big range. But I think even if we consider the lower end of that, it's quite a confronting statistic.
Say 30, but then men not getting attention on dating apps, not getting attention from females at all. I'd go to say that that's 50% of the male population. So when that 50% of the male population hears all these negative things about men, they're like, well, that's not me. Like, I'm not part of the problem. Like, I'm not even anywhere near girls. I think from a female's perspective, how do I say this? Not to have empathy, but most guys don't, they acknowledge that it's a problem, but they don't see that it's a problem because they're not involved with it at all. So if guys are not turning a blind eye to it, it's not the fact that they don't care about it, it's just the fact that they don't see that it's a problem for...
they almost...
I get what you're saying.
I get exactly what you're saying.
From, like,
I feel like...
Like, obviously guys are the ones that do this, and not like girls to have more empathy for guys, but girls to be more understanding that the common man doesn't see this as a problem because he's not involved with it.
Yeah, and I think...
I don't know if I said that right.
No, I get it. I think it's what we spoke about just before we hopped on air, that idea of the quote, I'm not sure who said it, but it's, while it's not by my hand, it's in my lap.
You said it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't make it up. But it's not by my hand, but it's now in my lap. That means it's my responsibility whether I am directly responsible. If my actions are the reason for the problem or not, I'm still responsible for it. Because now socially and culturally it's here. And if I'm a sexless man that doesn't behave in these manners towards women, you still can't divorce yourself from the fact that it exists. It's in your lap. But what can you do? What can you do? And hopefully today has offered some options, solutions, even educating ourselves around, wow, okay, I didn't realize the grey area of assault encompass these behaviors as well. Just having these conversations with yourself and going, what can you do? Because nothing is not the answer. Well, it's not my problem and I'm not one of the perpetrators, so I don't really have to do anything. I don't think that's what is going to move the culture forward to minimize and diminish this problem for a large portion of society. So nothing's not the right answer, and it might be a different solution for different people based off of where you're at. Yeah.
I think in my summary here, if I think about what words of advice can I provide for men of all ages, be it you're one of those young teenage boys who's starting to connect with women for the first time in your life, and you have all of this drive and these hopes to be, you want to be a stud, you want to be a guy who's, seen as valuable by the women in your life, and, you're a young man now who is existing as an adult in the world and in workplaces, and you hear parts of those conversations that happen in the locker room or at the office, and you know it's wrong, and you get that lump in your throat because you feel uncomfortable about it, because you recognize that you don't agree with what's being said. And you probably, to a degree, recognize that maybe even the guy who's saying it doesn't necessarily agree with that, but he's trying to be cool. He's trying to be a part of the culture that he thinks exists, the boys' club. Or you're a grown man who, in any way, shape or form can be a role model for somebody. I think the message is be a gentleman. Like if you look at that definition, I just searched, what's the definition of a gentleman? A chivalrous, courteous and honourable man. Like, it's an intention thing. If your intentions are good and you can take ownership for where you make mistakes and you can be accountable to them and you can have conversations with women and flex the empathy muscle and you can be vulnerable and honest enough to speak out about what you don't understand or what you're uncomfortable with, we naturally will progress in the right way. I believe in, the optimistic view on this, that if we care, if we have enough care and enough ownership, we'll move in the right direction. And I just want to encourage that. I want to encourage that let's not just have a conversation about this online at each other. Let's not speak at each other as men and women. Let's have conversations in real life. Like, let's exist in open dialogue where we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
I just think that's so important. Like, so much of what we talk about now that's relevant in culture exists online in these two-sided debates. It's not healthy.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, Brad. And I think to take a leaf out of how Foons has approached this topic, if you are feeling, defensive or inconvenienced by this narrative which is flooding the airways right now, take that as a sign to not just switch off the channel or to swipe away from it because, hey, I'm not a part of the problem. Take it as maybe a challenge or an opportunity to go, maybe I'll just ask my mum what her take is on this situation. Or, hey, I've got a sister. What does she think about what's going on right now? Or, wow, like any woman that's in your life, maybe just extend that in curiosity and just asking them what they make of what's happening right now. Because you might be really surprised, or it could illuminate a real issue that you might not have seen before around what's happening. And that in itself is progressive for the culture too. So just be curious as opposed to defensive. If you are feeling that, oh, well, fuck, like, well, I didn't do it, like, just be curious.
You said it before, like, just ask yourself the question, like, what could I do to be a better man? I think that's a powerful question. Yeah. If you don't know, ask a girl.
Yeah.
That's a bar. That's a bar.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
What can I do to be a better man? And if you don't know, ask a girl. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, I like that.
Fuck,
hey, I
the
think
world
that's
would be a better place.
A great way to close, lads. And as we said at the start of this episode, I just want to take a minute to say it again. We're not experts here. Mm-hmm. This was a part of starting dialogue, creating a conversation, being open to where we may get it wrong, being open to the feedback that will follow this episode and the conversations that will become an extension of what was discussed here today, not only in our group, but amongst listeners, amongst people who see clips from this episode online, whatever it may be. I believe that all those things we just wrapped up in conclusion there at the end are part of, improving the environment in which we exist in for everyone.
I just want to second that and say, like, we're definitely not experts. We're talking from a male perspective here, and we all have our own biases, but I'm more than happy to have an open conversation about this. If I've said something that from a female's perspective, like, I've got that completely wrong, I'm more than open to have an open and honest conversation. Like, I don't, there's no stake in the ground saying my viewpoint's right at all. Like, I'm open to have a conversation. So I just want to finish on that.
Yeah. Absolutely. We're just three mates trying to figure it out.
Too good. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.